What if I told you that tomorrow you could walk into a dealership and drive home in a brand new electric car for about the price of an iPhone? Most people would say that's impossible. Others would assume it's a toy, a scam, or some unfinished prototype that barely works. But in China, it's already happening. Real electric cars, real customers, real roads. So how can one country build a car so cheaply while the rest of the world keeps charging $40, $50, even $60,000 for the average new vehicle? The answer isn't cheap labor, it isn't lower quality, and it doesn't even begin inside a car factory. It begins with a decision China made years ago, one that quietly changed the economics of building cars forever. Once you understand that decision, these unbelievably cheap cars stop looking like a bargain and start looking like a warning. Trust me, the truth will be revealed at the end of this video, and it's not the answer most people are expecting. Why cheap cars are disappearing. For most of the 20th century, the American car industry understood something simple. A car did not have to be glamorous to matter. It had to be reachable. Something a young worker could save for. Something a family could stretch toward without breaking the budget. Something a student, a retiree, or a factory floor worker could look at and think, yes, that is possible for me. That was the original promise. Not speed, not status, access. But then the business changed, not overnight and not dramatically. It changed the way most important things change. Quietly, inside spreadsheets and quarterly earnings reports, where a pattern became impossible to ignore. Small cars sold in large volumes, but large vehicles made larger profits per unit. A compact sedan could bring a new buyer into the brand. An SUV could bring in far more money on a single transaction. A pickup truck, especially one configured with premium options, could do even better. And once that math became clear, the logic of the industry tilted in one direction and never fully tilted back. The question stopped being, how do we build cars for everyone? It became, why spend factory capacity on low-margin vehicles when bigger ones make so much more? Ford discontinued the Fiesta in 2019. The Fusion in 2020. GM killed the Cruze and the Impala around the same time. Across the industry, the entry-level sedan was methodically cleared from showrooms not because buyers stopped wanting affordable cars, but because building them had become the least attractive use of a factory floor. What replaced them were taller vehicles, higher trim levels, longer option lists, and feature packages many buyers never actually asked for. The cars became more capable in ways that made good marketing material. But they also became more expensive, heavier, and progressively less connected to what most people actually needed from a vehicle. Because most people do not need a truck that can tow 12,000 pounds. They need to get to work, pick up children, buy groceries, make it through an ordinary week without transportation turning into a financial burden. And when you strip away everything that is not essential to that task, the car the industry stopped building, the small, simple, affordable one, was exactly what the majority of people actually needed. America did not forget how to build cheap cars because the engineering became impossible. It forgot because the incentives changed. The affordable car was not killed by failure. It was replaced by a business model that worked better for companies, better for investors, and better for quarterly reports, but not for the person standing in a dealership, staring at a number they cannot afford. But if the cheap car disappeared, why did the system keep working for so long? Because the industry found a way to make expensive cars feel affordable. The monthly payment illusion. Once cheap cars disappeared from lots, the industry faced a genuine problem. People still needed vehicles. They still needed to get across town, reach jobs, and live in places where public transit could not realistically replace a car. But the vehicles on offer cost more every year, and real wages were not keeping pace. So the industry found a solution, not by lowering the price, by changing the number people were asked to focus on. That number was the monthly payment. A $50,000 car feels heavy. It forces a buyer to confront the full weight of what they are considering. But $699 a month sounds different. It sounds like something that might fit inside a budget. If you adjusted a few things, cut back somewhere, stretched a little because you need a car, and this is the only way it works. That reframe is the illusion. The buyer stops asking, can I afford this car? And starts asking, can I survive this payment? Those sound similar. They are not. Because once the monthly payment becomes the primary number, there is a simple mechanical trick that makes almost any price feel workable. Extend the loan. A 4-year loan becomes 5. 5 becomes 6. Then 7. Then, 84 months, 7 years of payments on a vehicle that begins losing value the day it leaves the lot. The payment shrinks, the car does not. And underneath the relief of a manageable monthly number, the total cost sits unchanged, now spread across more years, more interest, and a much longer window of financial exposure. The average new car loan in America now runs past 68 months. The average monthly payment has crossed $730. And roughly 1 in 4 buyers who trade in a vehicle arrives at the dealership already underwater on their previous loan, owing more than the car is worth, rolling that negative equity forward into the next purchase, and starting the cycle again before the last one is finished. There is a term for this inside the industry, being upside down. And the remarkable thing about it is how unremarkable it has become. Dealership finance departments now treat negative equity as a standard variable to be absorbed and restructured. It is not a warning sign, it is a line item. This is how an unaffordable car becomes invisible. It becomes a line item, a background cost, another recurring charge attached to modern life. But a car is not a subscription service. It is a depreciating asset that most buyers are financing at a loss from the moment they sign. The payment illusion did not solve the affordability problem. It made an unaffordable system feel normal for long enough that most people stopped questioning whether it had to be this way. And while America was perfecting that illusion, China was building something with a completely different logic. Not a better financing product, a cheaper car. America tried to hide the price. China tried to destroy it. The machine behind China's cheap EVs. China's cheap electric vehicles did not appear because of a shortcut. They are not cheap primarily because of lower wages, government handouts, or corners cut in manufacturing. Those explanations are too easy, and they are wrong in the ways that matter most. The real reason is a supply chain, and understanding it changes how you read every number attached to a Chinese EV. Building a conventional gasoline car means coordinating hundreds of suppliers across a long, geographically dispersed chain: engines, transmissions, fuel injection systems, exhaust components, cooling systems, emissions controls, and thousands of interconnected parts that have to travel long distances before they become a finished vehicle. That complexity has cost baked into every layer. Electric vehicles simplified some of that architecture. No combustion engine, no multi-speed transmission, fewer moving parts, a fundamentally different mechanical structure. But simplifying the vehicle did not automatically make it cheap for Western automakers. Early EVs were often more expensive than the gasoline cars they replaced because batteries were costly and supply chains were still being built. China moved differently. Instead of retrofitting existing gasoline infrastructure to accommodate EVs, it built the EV supply chain from scratch and built it dense. CATL, based in Fujian, became the world's largest battery manufacturer and produces cells for vehicles across dozens of brands. BYD manufactures its own batteries, motors, and semiconductors in-house, compressing the supply chain inside a single company. Hundreds of component suppliers, motor manufacturers, power electronics firms, thermal management companies clustered into the same industrial regions, close enough that parts do not have to travel far before they arrive at an assembly plant. That proximity matters in ways that are hard to quantify from the outside. When a supplier is nearby, design changes happen faster. Costs can be negotiated down with more competitors in the same space. A battery cell that was expensive in 2018 becomes dramatically cheaper when millions of units are produced annually, and every manufacturer is racing to reduce the cost per kilowatt hour. China's battery costs have fallen by roughly 90% over the past decade. The cost per kilowatt hour, the standard unit for measuring battery expense, dropped from around $1,200 in 2010 to below $100 by the mid-2020s. At that price point, the battery stops being the reason an EV has to be expensive. It becomes the reason an EV can be cheaper than the gasoline car it replaces. That single shift, more than any subsidy, more than any wage differential, explains why a finished, road-legal electric vehicle can sell in China for less than a used economy sedan sells for at auction in Ohio. The result is not just one cheap car. It is the infrastructure to produce cheap cars repeatedly, across dozens of models, from multiple companies, at a scale that keeps driving costs lower. Every factory that comes online adds volume. Every volume increase compresses unit costs further. Every competing supplier pushes prices down across the entire system. One side stretched the loan, the other side compressed the factory. And that difference is not a gap that can be closed with a better financing product. The tiny EVs everyone underestimates. The most consequential vehicles coming out of China are not the ones designed to impress Western reviewers. They are not the luxury sedans with enormous touchscreens. Not the performance EVs engineered to compete with Tesla on a track. Not the high-end models that arrive at European auto shows with polished presentations and favorable press coverage. The vehicles that matter most are smaller and far less glamorous. The Wuling Hongguang Mini EV, a two-door, four-seat urban car that sold for as little as $5,000 at launch, became the best-selling electric vehicle in China in 2021, outselling Tesla by a wide margin for months. It is roughly the size of a smart car. It has a range of about 100 miles. It has no frills and makes no apologies for what it is. A machine for getting from one place to another at a cost most people can actually manage. The BYD Seagull, launched in 2023, moved that formula upmarket, slightly more range, more features, still under $10,000 in China. The Sherry QQ ice cream, aimed at young urban buyers, sells for under $5,500. These are not niche products or loss leaders. They are volume vehicles built for the part of the market that most traditional automakers quietly stopped serving. From a distance, it is easy to dismiss them. Beside the trucks and SUVs that dominate American roads, they look almost cartoonish, short, narrow, modest in every direction. They are not the kind of vehicle that makes a person feel they have arrived somewhere. But that reaction is exactly the mistake the old auto industry keeps making. These vehicles were never designed to win a comparison against an F-150. They were designed to answer a different question. How do you move a person from one place to another at the lowest cost that still produces a reliable daily use vehicle? That sounds simple, but it is the question the mainstream industry stopped asking about 30 years ago, and the answer turns out to be commercially very powerful. Because most daily transportation needs are not complex. A car that can travel 80 to 100 miles reliably, charge overnight, and cost less than a used economy sedan covers the actual daily reality of the majority of drivers in most cities. For students who cannot afford a car payment, for retirees on fixed incomes, for delivery workers, urban commuters, lower-income families pushed out of the new car market entirely. For the people the industry stopped designing for the tiny EV is not a compromise. It is the first realistic option. And once a product starts solving a real problem for people who had no other answer, it does not stay at the bottom of the market for long. The mistake giants keep making. This is where the story stops being only about cars. Because what Detroit may be doing right now is something large industries have done before, something that looks like a rational business decision until it suddenly becomes an existential one. When a cheaper, simpler, less capable competitor enters a market from below, the established leader almost always responds the same way. It looks at the new entrant, identifies all the things the product cannot do, confirms that its own best customers do not want it, and decides the threat is not worth taking seriously. And for a while, that decision is correct. The early version of the disruptive product usually is worse. It is simpler, rougher, less refined. It does not serve premium customers. It does not fit the existing definition of quality. It looks like a toy or a product for people who cannot afford the real thing. Kodak saw digital cameras in the 1990s and understood they were technically inferior to film. They were right. Blockbuster saw early streaming as a niche product for people without decent video stores nearby. They were right about that too, for a moment. Nokia saw the first iPhone and noted that it lacked the antenna sensitivity and call quality of their hardware. Also correct. In each case, the incumbent was right about the first version of the threat. The mistake was not the initial assessment. The mistake was believing that the first version was the final version. Because cheap products improve, they improve because the companies building them are not distracted by defending a profitable legacy business. They improve because the pressure to reduce cost forces engineering creativity that premium-focused companies do not develop. They improve because every unit sold funds the next generation, and every generation is designed specifically to close the gap with whatever sits above it. The BYD that built the Seagull is not the same company that sold basic electric vehicles in 2010. Its battery technology now competes with the best in the world. Its higher-end models, the Han, the Seal, the Yangwang U8, are not economy compromises. They are credible vehicles that European and Asian buyers are purchasing in real numbers. The pattern is not that Chinese EVs will take over the American market tomorrow. The pattern is that they are learning the full stack of EV manufacturing while competing intensely at every price point. and that the companies doing that learning tend to move upmarket over time, not stay put. Detroit may look at the Wuling Mini and see something too small to matter. That is, historically, a dangerous thing to believe. The road ahead is being redrawn. The question is no longer whether China can build cheap electric vehicles. That has been answered in dealerships, on roads, and in sales figures that are hard to argue with. The question now is structural. What happens to an industry that built its profitability around vehicles most people cannot comfortably afford when a competitor enters with a completely different cost architecture? For most of the past century, the direction of the auto industry was straightforward: more size, more features, more technology, more cost. Every generation added something, and for a long time that felt like progress because buyers were still being served, even if the price was rising. But at some point, the addition of cost stopped being matched by the addition of value that ordinary people actually needed. The car stopped being a tool and became a financial product, a machine for generating loan revenue, monthly payments, and margin-rich option packages attached to something that moves. China entered with a different question. Not, how much more can we add, but how much can we remove and still solve the problem? That is a fundamentally more disruptive frame, because it does not compete on the same terms. It competes on the terms the old industry abandoned. The answer to that question produced the Seagull, the Mini EV, the QQ ice cream, vehicles that do not win on features, size, or brand prestige, but that cost less than a semester of college tuition and cover the actual daily transportation needs of the majority of people who own them. For the American market, the tariff wall currently holds. A 100% tariff on Chinese EVs makes the Seagull's domestic price roughly double before it clears customs, which neutralizes the cost advantage for now. But tariffs are a political tool, not an engineering solution. They do not change what China has learned to build. They do not close the gap in battery costs, manufacturing density, or supply chain efficiency. And Chinese automakers are already building around them through partnerships in Mexico, manufacturing plants in Europe, and technology licensing arrangements that put their engineering into vehicles assembled in other countries. BYD has opened assembly facilities in Hungary, Thailand, and Brazil. SAIC's MG brand already sells across Europe. The wall exists, but the knowledge, the battery chemistry, the supply chain architecture, the manufacturing process is already moving across it, one partnership at a time. The road ahead for the American auto industry runs through a decision that has been deferred for decades, whether to compete for the part of the market that was quietly surrendered, or to continue moving up market and hope that financing products can keep making expensive vehicles feel accessible. That decision may not feel urgent today. The trucks are still selling, the margins are still healthy, the quarterly reports still look good. But the cheap car has not stopped being necessary. The people who needed it have not stopped existing. They have just stopped being served, and that is the kind of gap that rarely stays empty for long. So maybe the real story is not just that cars became expensive. It is that an industry forgot what made the car powerful in the first place. A car was never only a machine. It was a bridge between where someone lived and where their life could go, between ordinary people and the opportunities that distance had placed just out of reach. For decades, America built that bridge better than anyone. Then it decided the bridge was not profitable enough and quietly stopped maintaining the low end. The need did not disappear. The people did not disappear. They just ran out of options and started making do with older vehicles, longer commutes, and monthly payments that stretched further than they should. Meanwhile, in Shenzhen and Hefei and Changzhou, the question was not how to make the payments smaller. It was how to make the car cost less to build. And after 20 years of supply chain construction, battery investment, and manufacturing competition, that question has an answer most of the world did not expect to arrive this soon. The next chapter of the car industry will not be decided by who builds the most impressive vehicle. It will be decided by who remembers that a car only changes the wood of grailed when ordinary people can afford to drive it. America built that truth once. The question now is whether it still believes it. If this video changed how you see the car industry, hit like and subscribe. We cover the quiet shifts reshaping the global economy, and there is more coming. And drop your answer below. Do you think American automakers will ever return to genuinely affordable cars, or has that road already been left behind? Goodbye, and see you in the next video.